and welcome to Woodward's Watercolours. I've just arrived back. I've been out and about doing lots of different things. I've got my cup of tea and a biscuit, so I'm going to eat it in a wee second. But what I wanted to do before I do anything else is say that there is something that frequently comes up whenever I'm teaching about watercolours. And the comment looks like this: I just overwork it all the time. I just have made a total mess. I've just. And it crystallised with me the last time that I was teaching that actually this person in particular hadn't messed up, hadn't overworked. She'd just forgotten to do one thing. And that one thing is possibly the most important thing when it comes to using the wonderful medium of watercolour. And it's this: you've got to let it dry. You see, whenever watercolour is dry, it is actually waterproof, and then you can put layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer. So I want to demonstrate that. So come with me and we're going to look at that together.
So this is a little A6 piece of gum strip, or gum meaning all the way around, of 300 GSM watercolour paper. It is cold pressed and therefore you can see the bumps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate this with the tones that I would normally use. So we're going to use a sap green, just straight from the half pan. Okay, I've got it the consistency I want. And we're going to just draw a simple box of the sap green. We're going to load it up so that it's as even as can be, but the paper will buckle ever so slightly. And also what I'm going to use is a brown, just a simple, I think it's probably a raw umber. Okay, so mixed up, it's a nice warm brown, probably then actually a burnt umber ironically. And we're going to do the exact same thing on this side. Now this is the kind of level of pigment that I like in the watercolor when I'm using it. And what we're going to do then is we are going to let it dry. So that's all we're going to do right now. This is the first layer and we're just simply going to let it dry. Now you may notice that I actually did not tell you the right thing about the little bit of watercolour paper that I was working on. It was not gummed the whole way around, and therefore as it dried it started to buckle more. So I have taped it down with watercolour tape. So as you can see, these have now dried with the wonders of moving image. These have now dried, and one of the things that I absolutely love about watercolour is you can control it to a certain extent, but it's unpredictability. You've got, which tends to happen, this lovely kind of outline where the colour has intensified as it's dried and it's risen. You've got these kind of marbling marks in the middle. Part of that's to do with the cold pressed paper, and you've got the same with this colour. Okay, so this is now layer 2. So we're going to use the same colour and the same kind of strength of colour, and I want to show you obviously what happens. So I'm going to draw another line across here, and we're going to make it sort of something similar in its kind of shape and kind of style. So now that that is dry, it is actually waterproof, and you can see that it is one layer on top of another layer. And I'm going to do the same with the brown. I wish I had kept the brown on the palette ready, that would have been helpful. I'm just gonna mix that up quickly because it's straight from the half pan, so I'm not gonna have to mix it up or anything like that. Okay, and I'm gonna do exactly the same thing, but I'm just gonna do it below here. So you can see that as now there's a little bit of the granules of the half pan have come away. Okay, so you can see that that is now layer 2. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to let that dry, and we're going to apply a third layer just to really hammer home the principle that watercolour works best in layers, and you've got to let it dry. So let's let this one dry and then we'll go to the third layer. We are now dry, and this, as you can see, look how unpredictably it's all sort of dried out together. I think with that's one of the things about watercolour that you either love or hate, because with the mediums like oil and also acrylic, you don't have that same thing going on. So what I want to do then is draw another rectangle, or maybe a square this time, that is going to go across all three. So let's do that right now. And we're just making sure that it covers all three areas. And with this one, I'm not going to wait until to let it dry. And I'm going to do it with the brown as well. Again, the same color, directly from the half pan, mixed to the same strength. And just ensuring that it covers all of the, it's got the two layers underneath, and then that third layer on top. The joys of a flat edge brush to be able to achieve that. So as you can see, if you continue to go on with this process, then you build up layer upon layer upon layer. It's really quite wonderful when you know how it works. So let me show you this in working practice. This is an unfinished painting that I began several days ago. I have now added on, I think, 2 or 3 extra layers. So I started with the watercolor pencil. No, I think I started with wash underneath, then I added some watercolor pencil on, then I let that dry once I'd added the water to it. Then I also added on another layer. So this is now probably about layer 4. And what I'm going to mix is the darker color. So we're using Winsor Newton. This is my, I'll show you, this is my little Winsor Newton palette set. I am mixing a lamp black or an ivory black, and I want to add in that umber that I was using as a demonstration color. So I really want it to be quite thick. I'm using a pointed wash. It's an Aquafine dealer Rowney. It was quite well, from my point of view, it was an expensive brush. It was about £12, but I have absolutely no regrets of getting it. So what I'm going to do, the little thing I love about it is obviously you've got the point to it. So I'm just looking to add in and bring in some areas of depth. So I'm just letting the brush kind of dance around. Now you can see that as I'm doing that, the colors or the layers underneath are by no means going away. Now, if I kept working at them, and I wonder if there's maybe a part of this painting that I could demonstrate what it looks like to lift a little bit of color. You're never going to be able to take it all off, as you might be able to scrape off the paint from an oil or an acrylic. Now with an acrylic, obviously you've got less time because it dries much faster. So I'm just adding in to these areas. Now the other thing that I can do is I can squeeze the brush. See all of the pigment being released there? Now the only problem is that as I move it a little bit around, then the brush will start to absorb some of it, which is actually going to work okay for me here. So I'm looking to just add in just a little bit of detail there. Okay, now that I've got that color, what I also want to do is I'm going to change my brush. I'm going to move to this, it's a Royal and Langnickel. It's actually falling, look, it's falling apart, but it's still workable and I still like it. It's a 12 flat inch, okay? And what I want to do with this is I am going to mix in some, really what can only be described as like a sunflower yellow, in with a pre-existing mix of yellow ochre that I have on my watercolor palette here. And I want to just add that in just some areas just to highlight that color's there. Now as I do that, it's going to be really interesting down here, because it's here that you'll see how well the layers work. So the flat edge brush, when you hold it in that kind of horizontal way, means that you can use it for the likes of reeds and grass, which is part of what's actually going on here. Now there's a little bit of that kind of yellowy tone just popping through. So I can use it just along here to highlight some of those areas. I'm going to give it a little flick because I love my beloved flick. But can you see quite clearly how adding that layer on top has not compromised the layer underneath? it actually brings this kind of a depth to it as you begin to work on the layers. Now what I said I would also do is try and find an area where I could maybe try and demonstrate lifting a little bit of color. So I have wet the pointed wash, squeezed off the excess, and I just want to agitate slightly. Now this has been on the paper for a while, so it will let it lift ever so slightly. Just getting a little bit of a tissue here so that I can just show you as I dab it. It'll just lift it ever so slightly. Just a little bit more water. Just a little bit more agitation. Dab it off, and that's going to lift ever so the slightest bit of pigment from the page. So that is completely different to adding another layer.
So this is the wonderful world of watercolour. If you're going to work with watercolour, unless you're doing wet on wet and you're intentionally letting it bleed, you have to let it dry. Watercolour is one of the best and most relaxing ways to learn patience and strategically thinking about the areas that you're going to work on. When I'm doing a building or a landscape, typically I'll do the sky, then I'll move to the foreground. Then when the sky's dry, I know that it's safe to begin to work on the with the actual view of the building or whatever it is that I'm working on. So watercolour works in layers. You can put down one layer, let it dry, another layer, let it dry, and just keep going. Watercolour is essentially waterproof whenever it's dry. Now with some vigorous agitation, as you could see in the last bit, you can begin to lift that off. But watercolour teaches you patience. It's an absolutely wonderful medium. If you've got any further questions, please just write them down in the comment below, or you can message me directly. You can go to my website, woodwardswatercolours.co.uk. But if you're enjoying these videos, then do please like, share and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.